So after the smash-tastic result of the first game and the unique art style that Rareware probably patented or something or other, the guys decide to fire up their fancy 3D modeling computers for another go at the DKC franchise, Diddy Kong's Quest. After the events of the first game, the Kremlings were defeated, the bananas were reclaimed, and they were able to live out their beach bum lives up until the point that the Kremlings struck again and kidnapped Donkey Kong off screen because they were told by Rareware that they need to make another game, and so here we are. Maybe the King K. Rool that was off screen as well in this game should have sent a letter to his future self teaching him how to steal DK so efficiently. It seems weird. I suppose what wasn't odd was just how much of a step forward that this sequel was, since the original game nearly had a case of original game syndrome, where the fledgling developer comes up with a new idea for a game, and so instead of investing a lot of energy into getting a narrative together and fleshing out the whole game with a bunch of additional features, Donkey Kong Country pretty much had the gameplay model and not much else, which works in a platformer since Nintendo has been doing that for decades. And most of all, the gameplay was fun, it was interesting, and it had cool locations and level design to jump around in, along with a bunch of whole unique gimmicks that we never really saw before to break up the usual every so often. From the results that Rareware and Nintendo got out of the original title, it was obvious that the two companies decided that they found the winning formula, and just like most franchises with a successful case of original game syndrome, the pair decided to double down on the idea, and it paid off for a huge payday. We get new types of levels, some twists on the gimmicks from the first game, and some unique ones to fill in those gaps. A couple new mechanics and helper friends, so yeah, it's essentially the first game again, with some more bells and whistles, which is good because the original was good, and this game is doing fucking great. You can clearly tell that the guys at Rareware had definitely gotten a lot of experience dealing with integrating their 3D art style into the SNES's capabilities with this game, since there's a lot of additional detail in the level design and effects that didn't exist in other games, like better flashlights and lighting, the backgrounds that have some more vibrant colors, and Mode 7 added onto it to make more interesting looking levels, plus some more varied enemy designs along with the two entirely new level themes that didn't exist at all in the first game, or at least not this in-depth, like the ship, the amusement park, and the entire beehive thing. What was nice about the sequel was that Diddy Kong's player 2 in this game is actually Dixie Kong, which should be her debut to the series, and whereas in this first game, DK and Diddy basically played exactly the same with the same jumping and attack abilities, maybe one had more height, maybe one had more power, something like that. But Dixie gets her trademark gliding ability, which gives her and the player a nice advantage over using Diddy Kong regularly, since it's easier to control the character, especially since Diddy's differentiator was always that he could jump higher than Donkey Kong. Along with that, the game gives the player new animal friends like the snake, which serves as a pogo stick and gives you a better hitbox to deal with enemies, Squawks, which helps the player get items and kill enemies by spitting at them constantly, and then there's the spider, which can create platforms to quickly cross any gap that it comes across, and which again gives Rareware the ability to make new types of levels and challenges, which gives DKC 2 a lot of that needed variation to keep the player playing the game. At least the game's got a bit more plot going on, which I talked about a little bit, but might as well get in full for the people considering playing or replaying this game. Okay, so in the first game, it was pretty basic. The Kremlings show up, which is a clan of extremely dickish alligators and company, led by a king who is a strange giant lizard thing, usually named King K. Rool, who steals a stash of bananas from the DK crew, because honestly, they just wanted to screw over the Kongs, who they hate very much. This whole thing isn't even for profit, it's just the Kremlings dicking over the Kongs, because this is some ridiculously silly and pointless feud they've got going on. And so, when the bananas were liberated in the last game, the Kremlings apparently had to sit down and accidentally came up with the most brilliant kidnapping plot ever conceived, and managed to kidnap Donkey Kong in like the first 2 minutes of the game actually starting. And then the intelligence immediately falls apart, since the Kremlings decide to leave a note to Diddy and Cranky that they did this, and they're holding DK for ransom so they can get the banana stash back. The bananas that they have no intention of using, using or doing anything with. Again, they're just dicking over the Kongs for freaking no reason. The Kremlings are usually motivated by the pettiest of revenge plans, so I have no idea what their endgame is on this one, because you don't hold a person ransom just for revenge. In order to prove Diddy's worth as an actual game protagonist, I mean, this is a Rareware game, so this could easily be in the game itself as an actual meta joke about video games in general. Diddy takes up the challenge and decides to invade the Kremlings island and free DK by force. First by getting on K. Rool's totally unguarded pirate ship, then the island, the volcanic insides, some sort of roller coaster park in the middle of it, then the evil castle on top that's tethered to the dirigible that K. Rool built because fuck it, evil video game villain. Apparently cutting the rope was too big of a hassle for K. Rool, since he'd obviously realized that Diddy and Dixie were climbing his island from the time they actually got to it, or he was sleeping the whole time, or he's predestined for failure, or both. I don't know what's going on. It's just a video game, therefore dumbassery ensues. While it's incredibly easy and personally hilarious to pick apart stupid video game plot lines like this, that could have more simply ended with the villain shutting out the protagonist because he can fly, ultimately it all works in a platform game, and since the gameplay is top-notch, I absolutely legitimately do not mind it being this silly, since Donkey Kong has always been a more comedic franchise that at least keeps its consistency with its tone, and most importantly, is actually funny through its cheeky gags, especially from Cranky, who unfortunately is not so prevalent in the sequel since the game had shifted focus onto introducing new characters like Swanky and Wrinkly, who on top of selling items or knowledge to the player, also introduced new mini-games to the series, which is another way to vary up the moment-to-moment gameplay if you're into that sort of optional stuff. I'm not really personally, since ancillary mini-games aren't really my speed, so I'm not going to offer an opinion on if they're good or not. It's just that they exist, and the fact that Rareware had spent the time on developing time wasters in their own game shows that they have that creative drive that makes their game so enjoyable and unique, even through the decades that have followed from their releases. But then we have to start talking about the point that this game turns on the player. The point in the game where after the game has invited you into its home, sat you down, had a lovely conversation and brought out some pie for you, then the game sneakily locks the doors and starts having uncomfortable monologues about forests full of blood, and then after the anxious cough to break the tension, the game pulls out a shower rod and knocks your ass out. We were having such a nice time, and then the whole thing slowly grinds to a halt at the end in order to piss you about, and making unreasonable demands that our thumbs can't handle. Well, what I'm actually getting at in this hypothetical is that there's a point around the second to last world of the game that the entire thing hits a 90-degree difficulty spike that never ends. What's really heartbreaking about that shift is that this game maintains its well-made quality even when it's kicking your ass up and down the garden path. So while you're still having fun enjoying the creativity and the soundtrack, you're still not actually progressing anywhere and usually ending up frustrated at yourself for not being capable of seeing the game through. The problem is that, like with the first game, Rareware were hardcore believers in the outdated way of making video games, i.e. difficulty climbs up towards the end and never goes down, leaving most of the players in the dust and requiring them to know the levels by heart in order to even get the chance of beating them back. And what's even more cruel is that the game only gives you one save point per world, so if you lose all your precious lives, then you have to get ready to repeat a whole bunch of stuff. Although I guess you could save after every level to keep bookmarking your progress, granted if Wrinkly never raised her price for doing so above free, but Jesus, hell, this game would have been demoralizing to play back in the day up to the point of maximum overload, which was the infamous level right at the end, Screech's Sprint. This whole thing requires no margin for error, precision flying, and then a whole obstacle-filled race with another bird that again requires pinpoint accuracy to get through if you can't find the shortcut, and even in the shortcut, or you just end up losing, and if you ever hit anything, then you're liable to either straight up die, or lose one of your 2 HP and then die, because Rareware said so. At this point, I was using save states so long ago to get through this SNES classic, but this level took the damn cake on that one. It was because one of the many jumps you have to make as regular Diddy requires not only for the player to learn Diddy's sprint jump move, which gives him the extra distance and range he needs to get across these things, but also to do it exactly correct or die, because the hurdle between both platforms is in the exact position where it's an all or nothing thing. There's no way to get around talking about this, because while the game overall is a stone cold masterpiece, one of the best games on the SNES, no doubt about it, it's also one of those classics where it's nearly impossible to finish because of the Nintendo hard mentality, where you've got to sacrifice your soul to the game to get that chance. Like I said before, it is a ridiculously heart-wrenching affair. I won't talk about this part of the game too much, but it's definitely easy enough to say that by this point the bosses too have been getting in on this action. The second to last world I'm pretty sure had the giant bee, which was a strange AI that was hard to predict where it was going, and you can only barely get out of its way throughout the entire fight. And the arena itself is surrounded by instant kill walls, since you have to beat it while flying, but the final battle with K. Rool is just, well, it's what Rareware did last time. It was a multi-phase boss fight that's quick and painful, get memorizing or die with few water breaks in between. And I think that DK shows up in the middle and gives the player some healing item, but it's been ages since I played Diddy Kong's Quest, so I can't be exactly too sure about it. If Donkey Kong 64 didn't exist, I would easily say that Diddy Kong's Quest was their magnum opus, or at least pretty close to it depending on GoldenEye 64. The game is a beautiful, ingenious, and satisfying masterclass in how to make a clever platformer. Of course, there's a little story to it, so if you need an example of how to do that right, Ratchet & Clank continues to exist, but other than that, Rareware went above and beyond to capitalize on the success of its original. It added more mechanics, it added more characters, some more rewards, some benefit of life upgrades. They added more comedy, more writing, more detail, and it's all actually hilarious. It's all just more of the original that pushes the boundaries of what the SNES could accomplish now that people were getting better acquainted with how to develop for the console. It is one of the best made games ever for this platform, and it sold amazingly well for its time, which makes it all the more depressing that Rareware decided to set fire to the hopes and dreams of its audience by going all in on the Nintendo hard mentality. That meant by the end you had to memorize and execute the level flawlessly to even have at least a decent chance at getting through it, even with multiple lives and checkpoints throughout these absurdly long levels. It is like conducting surgery to get through a couple of them by the end game. Diddy Kong's Quest should be a game that should have been a slam dunk highlighted recommendation for retro plays for the most obvious of reasons. But it seems like I have to put the caveat on such a recommendation just because of that difficulty spike at the end, because of the feelings that come up when that happens. How can you give someone a game that they most likely will get super frustrated at by the end in such a devious manner? As you can tell from all the comments in the video, I did play the original SNES version instead of the GBA remake, since people were saying that the original does have a little edge on the GBA version, but maybe the handheld one started making steps to solve the difficulty issue. But I can't make an opinion on whether or not that's true, because obviously I didn't play it. Most cruelly of all, and I think this is the truest sense, I'll have to say that Diddy Kong's Quest is one of those classics that helped continue the technological rise of video games as a creative endeavor that no one should go back to and try to play through again, at least on the original hardware. Now we do have save states that mitigate a lot of that crap, but going back to a legit cartridge and trying to get through this? Hell no, you cannot get through that bullshit. Well, I will end this video like I always do by putting up this colorfully painted scoreboard. And I do wish all of you out there who stuck through it to the end a victory for gamers, because you all deserve it. Thank you once again, and I'll see you again for the next game next week.